Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Conversation Hub with myself and with
Tanya Lee. Hello,
yes,
good morning.
and so it's a very simple process today. We're going to look a little bit at a favourite topic of mine, which is accountability over responsibility. Some people say versus. I prefer over. So, without ado, was there anything you wanted to add, Tan, before we kick off?
No, I think it's a great topic to talk about, and I know it's one of the things you talk about all the time, which is why it's so important to understand what is the difference, because the words are used really interchangeably.
Yes.
And actually, to be a really effective leader and to be an effective team member, you need to understand what is the difference.
Yes.
What am I accountable for? What am I responsible for? And what
Yes.
does that then mean?
Yes. And I suppose for me, accountability first came out with Lencioni. It's one of his levels. And let me explain, first of all, what responsibility and accountability are when they're together, what they mean as the same, and what accountability for me means over and above responsibility, and why accountability is a real leadership term. And by leadership, everybody can lead. And so that's why I'm really keen that people understand. So responsibility is about 20% of accountability, and responsibility and accountability have the same thing within it, if you like. It's did you do what you said you were going to do, and did you do it in a timely fashion, and did you deliver what you said you were going to deliver? That's taking responsibility. And it's also something where companies and organizations run by giving people responsibility for certain areas, i.e., they are the person who manage, the person who checks, the person who looks at some of the historical metrics. So the way I look at responsibility is it's very much a historical look backwards. Did you do what you said you were going to do? And are you taking control more of the areas that you are responsible for? Accountability moves us forward from there. And this is what picks out people who really understand, for me, what leadership is all about in the definition previously given. Accountability is about, it's not just about did you do or did you reach or did you enable to happen what you were responsible for, but about 70% of accountability is what are you going to do once you've got that result? What is it that you're going to do with what you've been working towards as a responsibility? And so therefore, it's very much what we refer to as throwing it forward. So when I have achieved the development of this piece of software, what is the value of that to the company? And what is the value of its deployment? And what is the value into the future development of the company? People who are accountable really understand how to take forward those things that they have already invested in and created value from. And I think that is the key difference between the two. Accountability is someone who is accountable for taking forward from those things that they have delivered, whereas somebody who's responsible just says, I've done that, right, what's next? And that is the major difference for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In my very simplistic terms, thanks for sharing it. Responsibility is the duty to perform a task, and accountability is the ownership of that outcome. So that pushing it forward. So that is in my head how I describe it. Responsible, you perform the task. You've got a duty to do it. Accountability is I own that outcome. So that, as you were saying, what happens once that task has been completed? What is the outcome? How do we move that forward?
And ownership is a great word to use here, I think. Thanks for feeding that in, because it's a bit like ownership of a house.
Yeah.
Ownership of a house doesn't end because it's still standing when you return to it. It's about, are you maintaining and pushing forward the value of the property by maintaining it, by adding things to it, by decorating it internally? So I don't want to stretch the analogy too far, but I think that's a really good word to use when you talk about accountability. Means I own this, and because I own it, I'm taking it forward rather than just leaving it where we've arrived as though, well, okay, that's done, off we go. And so I think that for me is the essence of the two words, if you like. And it's the other thing I emphasized at the beginning a little bit is it's accountability over responsibility rather than versus or instead of. We all have responsibilities, and that's very clear. And those responsibilities can sometimes be significantly more onerous. We can think of some of the health and safety environments that people work in, and their responsibilities are very heavy. And in those circumstances, though, getting those responsibilities right is key often to the delivery of the role. But even health and safety people will tell you, actually, it's being accountable for the procedures that you're doing and how they affect the future and what they're doing for the future that is most important at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for me, and I'd love to your thought on this, is responsibility. You can share those tasks. So responsibility is shareable. So a project team could have a load of tasks that they are responsible for and they share them. But ultimately, the project manager has ownership and is accountable for delivering that result. And I don't think that accountability can be shared, because then it becomes diluted.
Again, that's a fantastic way of looking at the differences. And for me, I think the slight nuance I would add is I think you can cascade accountability. And by that, I mean break down its parts so that different people can be accountable for different things within the overall accountable goal. But you're right. At the end of the day, what it makes clear is you have an ownership hierarchy within any project, within any product, within any service. And effectively, what that means is accountability flows up. And let's not get into that analogy about stuff that flows down in an organization. But I think you're absolutely on the money. If you use accountability, then that accountability flows up. And as you say, while you can't divide the actual accountability, you can cascade it down through an organization. And that accountability means that accountability just builds. So actually, that accountability goes up the organization, not flows down it. And I think that's, again, another really strong reason and why Lencioni used the word accountability over responsibility.
Yeah, and I think, for me, it's around, if I don't truly understand as a leader, or as we say, anyone can be a leader. You don't need a title to be a leader, or someone if I don't understand in an organization what I'm accountable for and what I'm responsible for, it leads to confusion. And that confusion can be really stressful, can lead to a blame culture, because if we don't understand our accountability or our responsibility, what happens then? Are we blaming other people for failure when actually we should have owned it? And balls get dropped. So actually, within organizations, if we're not really clear about who is accountable for what and who is responsible and how they report what they've done, the task, the duty to do the task, there's a lot of confusion.
And we see that a lot in as you know, in leadership teams.
Yeah.
And I am talking about the sort of classic leadership team, the C-suite, the business unit directive. And you're absolutely right. If we don't have accountability, there's lots of the financial director will report, or the CFO will report on their responsibilities of looking backwards and how did the company perform. Okay, those are very responsible things to do. And the marketing chief marketing officer or the chief sales revenue officer will look at things to do with marketing and sales retrospectively. But as a team, they come together to understand what are they going to be accountable for in the next quarter, half year, next 12 months, strategically maybe every 2 or 3 years. And when they take on that accountability, it's very much about pushing and looking at the forward direction of the business. And that the accountable is the strategic word. The responsibility is the tactical word. And that's, we often talk about strategic and tactical. And I think that these two words are, in my view, are very much divided along those sort of lines. Accountability is about strategic direction and where the ownership of the business is going to be over the next 12 months to 2 years. And responsibility is very much looking back and seeing okay, this is what we built and this is how we built it. Great. Now, what do we, and then that transitions into the strategic discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we looked at a roadmap, that vision, that mission is our account. That's what we own. That's what we're accountable for. And actually that roadmap on how we get there is the tasks that we have shared responsibility for or responsibility for. And I think for me, it is that whole point of confusion. If we don't really understand the difference or we're using them interchangeably, for me, and we talk about this all the time, and I'm going to bring it up again, it erodes trust.
Yes.
It erodes trust because we talked earlier, there's confusion. If I'm confused about what I'm doing, I've naturally we don't trust the process.
Yes.
We probably don't trust the person because there's a blame game potentially because nobody is taking accountability or responsibility. And it helps us collaborate more effectively if we trust and we understand what we're accountable for and what we're responsible for. Which, of course, as we always talk about, is high performance, reaching your potential. If we have all those things in place and we have a real understanding of where we're going, it's going to result in better performance, higher performing teams.
Yes. We talked a little bit pre this session. I'm sure people are not surprised that we have a little bit of a discussion before we get into these. And I talked about authenticity. And you said, oh, that's interesting. How would you bring that into accountability? Yeah. And I think you've just done it without me having to do anything else. We talk about authenticity and vulnerability, right? Yeah. And when you're accountable, it gives you the opportunity to be vulnerable and say, look, I don't think this is going well, rather than keep on, we've always known about the RAG system, red, amber, green. And, people say, oh, it's green, 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 right up to the last day. And all of a sudden the project goes red. And if you're accountable, what you say early is, I'm accountable for this and I'm in trouble. And it allows you to be authentic, and it allows you to say, look, I'm being what we call intimate with you. I'm being authentic. I'm being vulnerable. I'm telling you. And the whole point is that when we get to accountability and as this is, go back to Lencioni, so it's a nice circle, if you like, is you're a team. If you've signed up to something, what we were talking about 10 minutes ago, if you've signed up to something as a team on the strat plan, it was a team sign up. And it is therefore all of you are accountable for delivering it. It's not suddenly the financial officer's problem or the marketing officer's problem, or if they need help and they've asked you and been vulnerable and they've been all authentic about their accountable problem, then everybody can move forward together to help you reach it. If everybody's saying, oh, that's not my responsibility, nothing to do with me, all of a sudden the team breaks down. You don't have high performing team. You might have a working group, but that's not the same thing. And all these things tie together, and it is hard. It needs constant effort. true leadership is about making constant effort to make things accountable over responsibility, to making things authentic, making sure that people feel vulnerable. And again, we get into the psychological safety. You mentioned it of, are you collaborating? Are you actually challenging? And then also at any one time, are you learning? Are you vulnerable for inclusion? All those sort of things come into this discussion. And what makes great leadership teams great are these things, not whether they institute the best AI program or the best lean Kanban program or whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, that psychological safety is huge in any organization, that, you know, rewarded vulnerability, so that you are vulnerable and you are not ridiculed or mocked for being vulnerable. You actually get an output and are rewarded for that vulnerability. And I always remember, as a leader at the beginning of my leadership journey, I felt I always needed to be right. I always had to have the answers. And it's something I've always worked with my team to say, actually, to say I don't understand or to say that doesn't make sense to me is a strength, not a weakness. But actually understanding that and the reward that you get from that is so important, because we know things happen when people take accountability as control. It is not control. Accountability is not control. Accountability is around sharing responsibility, but being accountable at the end. It's not about the complete control of everything that goes on. And I think that's one of the common pitfalls we get with people who say, I'm accountable, I own this, and I am the only person doing it.
Yes. And you remind me again, the thing about accountability is it is you're accountable, so therefore you're responsible, which we've talked about in terms of differentiating the two. But you're accountable looking forward for what you're not going to be able to do, or where you have weakness going into the future. And that is not measured by responsibility. It is measured by leaders and individuals and teams who are accountable for saying, we're going to be challenged by this. We don't have the skills to do this. Not waiting to the last minute and then suddenly saying, oh, well, this was always going to be a problem. I think that the majority of failures that I see in projects are at whatever level in an organization, and I've worked at all levels in an organization, both personally as a coach consultant, if you like, is the teams that succeed say, we prioritize these things. Are we putting this off because in prioritizing it down here, we're not really being accountable for how challenging that's going to be in the future? And that ability to say, hang on, let's be accountable for those things that we know we need to do that are hard. You don't necessarily have to do them immediately, but let's not pretend that they're easy. I think, or that we know how to achieve them. I think this is sort of the most important part of ensuring that you have a high performing team is not playing the game. It's actually being part and heavily inclusive in what is the future for what's going to roll out. And that again is where we come back to the future and the ownership and being accountable is all of those things. And if people use the term, but I'm responsible for that, I always get a bit nervous that they're only looking at the conclusion of getting something done, not at the value of the conclusion when it's reached. And that is something that I think about a lot.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting one because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier as well. Sometimes people in an accountability role, particularly if you're in senior leadership or you have a team, any leadership, or in the formal sense of I've got a team, if you own and control accountability, how disempowering is that for your team? Because to me, that is all around, we should be empowering our team to move forward. Actually, if I own it, but I own it in a controlled way, in that I'm the only person doing it, I would devolve any accountability from the team, and they only have responsibility. So I'm task driven, not outcome driven.
Yeah, that's you take me back to my agile days, and what is a team's ownership? And again, this is what's driven part of my thinking, and where I've reached is that the team owns whatever other members of the team committed to. It's not, ownership is not an individual thing, and you and I have just discussed this, and is it different across accountability and so, well, can you cascade it, as you talked about earlier? At the end of the day, if a team agrees an accountable deliverable, an accountable future, then they're all responsible for it, even if they're not contributing individually to that thing to be delivered. So you might have a team that are working on a software product, and they've got an architect, and it's the architect's job to map out the architecture that's going to both that the software is going to sit on and be best delivered by. Now, everybody is accountable for that design. It's not, there's the fact that there's a subject matter expert in the room or someone who's skilled that's delivering it doesn't mean that you don't have ownership and therefore accountable for making it delivered. And to give you an example of that, so someone says, I've written the code, but it's not my job to sort out the architecture. Well, I'm sorry, it is your job to be part of the team. And being part of the team means that you are, as a group, accountable, and as a group, you own those things that the team have delivered to or have said they'll deliver. Now, the interesting part of that is it puts the onus when you are discussing these things earlier on. Did you speak up? Did you challenge things that you felt were non-deliverable? Did you collaborate on things so that everybody understood what was deliverable? And when you start to put these ideas and you take real examples and you put them in front of teams on things that they've previously done, it really does remove the blinkers from the eyes. It really does focus people's minds into, oh, yeah, we didn't take ownership and we weren't accountable for that, were we? Because 6 of the 7 of us did this, but the 7th person was left to flounder and we just blamed them. And many people, sadly, I've seen dismissed from companies or removed or demoted because they have been lumped with the responsibility of failure rather than the whole team being accountable for what didn't happen. And it is a whole team issue, and it's what makes teams work. If they're not accountable together, how do you work together? And it's fascinating. If you look at teams, if you go back to earlier stages of line production in manufacturing and so forth, it was the teams that worked together that got the most done, not the individuals who were putting nuts on the wheel or fixing the brace or putting tires on or putting the seats into the cars. It was a team that worked together that delivered the best product.
Yeah. I think for me, it's still that blurring of responsibility and accountability. One person is accountable ultimately.
Yes.
There will be responsibility within that team, and part of that is that collaboration and knowing who it is. I think by sometimes blurring accountability, we get everybody is responsible, but no one is accountable.
Mm-hmm.
You can absolutely be responsible and accountable for a task within that, but the ultimate accountability is for the outcome at the end, the big outcome. Because I've seen situations where everybody is responsible, but no one is accountable. And that tends to fail because we're like, as you say, we probably work in silos of responsibility.
Yes.
And we don't have one person that's accountable.
Yes.
It's like going back to that beginning, project manager
Yes.
is accountable for the outcome at the end. Everybody is responsible for doing a task and may be accountable for one outcome, but the overall outcome is probably the responsibility of one person.
Yeah. You now remind me of some work I did with Nissan and Renault.
Yeah.
And I was in Japan taking Agile back to Japan, which, believe me, was an interesting life experience. I can't believe too many people have done that. And I remember talking to the guys at Nissan, and they said, everybody has a responsibility to stop the line if there's a problem.
Yeah.
So anybody can stop the whole line, but the person accountable for that is the shift supervisor or the shift manager. And so they all know that it can be done, but it's not done on a whim.
Yeah.
And equally, it's not done when it's really important, because they all eventually, as you say, one person is accountable, but they all feed their responsibility into that accountability. And the person who's accountable knows that they have a target to hit. They have a certain number of cars or vans to get off the end of the production line. So it was another one of life's, in the early 2000s, one of life's lessons for me was that, you can have responsibility, but at the end of the day, the accountability sits with somebody. And while that might cascade up a bit, at the end of the day, the person accountable is the person who has to look at and understand and solve the problem so it doesn't come up again. They might solve it through others, of course. That's not, they have to do it all themselves. But very interesting. For me, it was fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that, to me, gives that empowerment or autonomy of making a decision. That's, that is not the control of accountability. That is really someone going, do you know what, you've got the autonomy. I'm empowering you to stop it if something happens. So here you go. I guess I'm really conscious we've got 2 minutes left. And I'm thinking about, how would you coach this? What questions would you ask? And I would ask people, what are you accountable for versus what tasks you need to do? Because actually, to be accountable, you're not necessarily doing the task.
No. I think that's a very good place to start. And I don't think that there's it's almost like we talked about, or I talked about a circle, you talked about, I can't remember, earlier on, and that there isn't necessarily an entry linear point where you've entered here and you go down the journey. I think that for me, accountability is about asking, well, when you've done this, how do you measure what you're going to do moving forward? How is that reflected? What is the strategy of the things that you're trying to achieve? What is the long-term story that you've put together that says we do this, we do that, and this is the cascade of delivery? And is delivery cascaded in that way that builds the value in the business? We're about growth. We're all about growth through humans, human interaction. Delivery in a business is still delivered by humans, not by automatons or by computer skills. So I'm always interested to say, okay, what does it, if they're accountable, what does this mean for the business if we achieve this?
Yeah.
And I'm interested in that answer, because what is, do you as a team share the delivery of these things? That's another, for me, has always been a good question. How do you take ownership of the things you said you're going to deliver? And if a team starts saying, well, that's her responsibility and that's his responsibility, I start to really get a vibe that they're actually not a team. They're a working group. And if I have teams who turn to me and say, well, we're all accountable together. If we don't get this done, it's no good us pointing at Jim and saying he didn't put the nuts on the wheel if the engine drops out. The really important thing is they're all accountable for getting a car off the production line. And what that means is they can sell it. What that means is they make money, and what that means is they reinvest and they develop their product. So I'm very much of the view that accountability is about asking them what it means for them in the future as much as what it means to tick the box today.
Okay, I'm conscious we've got to the end. Thank you, Michael. I just want to end with my thoughts on accountability and responsibility. So to me, accountability is transformational and responsibility is tactical. I hope you've enjoyed today, and if you want further discussions or there is something that you think I'd love this in the conversation hub, please contact us. Go on to cultureworksconsortium.com, send us a message, or go on to LinkedIn and contact either Michael or myself to talk about what do you want to hear next. Have a great week.
Indeed. And a goodbye from me, and don't forget our YouTube channel.